It's funny how you can think you know someone your whole life, even in the moments that seem insignificant, and then, out of nowhere, everything you believed starts to unravel. That's where I found myself, caught between my husband, Thomas, and a woman named Sarah. I wish I could spill it all, but it began with a red flag so small I couldn't even see it at first. We had been married for 5 years. By then, you'd think I could read him like a book, right? Thomas had this work project that demanded long hours, and while I understood he was building his career, Sarah, this new, sharp woman, suddenly appeared everywhere, at the office, at dinner parties, showing up at the oddest times. I should have seen it then. Those little things, like him staying late at the office or an odd text that buzzed in while we were sharing dinner. At first, I dismissed it all. It was just work, right? But then one day, he forgot to reply to my text about dinner plans. Rarely did he miss those messages. I started to reflect on the texts I received during our meals, brushing them off until the worry began to creep in. I know what you're thinking, why didn't I just confront him? But I didn't want to be that woman, the one who gets suspicious over nothing or who overthinks every little detail. Still, a pattern began to emerge. He'd wake up at odd hours to answer emails in the middle of the night. It made me question everything. Why didn't I just ask him directly why he was being secretive? Once again, my hesitation rooted itself in fear of becoming that insecure person. As I delved deeper into this quiet concern, I began to check his emails while he showered or glance at his phone when he left it unattended. Sarah's name began to appear in unexpected places, urgent messages sent at late hours, mentions during project updates. It could all be innocent, right? Perhaps they were merely colleagues working closely together. But then, the connections began to form in my mind, too many late nights, too many work trips, and the worst part, the gnawing sensation in my gut that informed me something was amiss, even when I had no proof. I decided I had to act. I wasn't about to sit idly by while my world felt like it was slipping away. So, I showed up at his office, intending it to be a sweet surprise, a cute "I miss you" moment. Instead, I received a shock. Sarah wasn't merely there. She was in his car, sitting so close to Thomas that the windows fogged up, and my heart plummeted. The voice inside me screamed to leave, to turn away and not ruin everything, but I stayed and watched. I don't know what they were discussing, but I no longer cared about details. Everything I thought I knew shattered in an instant. I was witnessing not a married couple, but two people entangled in a world that didn't include me. Of course, I left before they noticed me. What could I have done? Burst in and create a scene? I wasn't one to thrive on drama. But I also knew this wasn't a moment I could ignore. Complicated feelings surged within me afterward. I didn't confront Thomas right away. I didn't want to be rash or give him an easy out. I needed time to think and process, but the questions about Sarah lingered. Was she merely a coworker, or was there something more to their connection? Was she just a coworker, or was she something more? It was a funny thought, because I could have taken the easy route. I could have stayed home, ignored it all, and acted like nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't some naive woman waiting for her husband to return. I had to confront the reality of the situation and decide what came next. It left me wondering, what would you do? Would you leave, hoping it would all blow over, or confront him? Would you lay it all on the line, risking everything right now? The weight on my chest felt heavy, and I didn't have answers, but perhaps that was the point. Maybe there was no simple way out. All I knew was that everything had shifted, and I doubted I'd ever see them the same way again. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything around me seemed distant and muffled. I could hear the noise of life, but it felt unreal. The truth I discovered remained suspended in the air, invisible yet suffocating, much like the thick humidity before a storm. Life had to go on, I couldn't just shut myself away. While I tried to process everything, it became increasingly difficult. I wanted to talk to Thomas, but he seemed oblivious to the tension that enveloped me. I noticed the stress in his eyes, even as he attempted to maintain an air of normalcy. Whenever I asked about his day, his smile was just a moment too quick, and his answers were vague. We avoided the unspoken issue, but I knew something was off. One evening, unable to bear the thought of waiting for Thomas to come home late, pretending everything was fine, I made an unexpected decision. I took a different route and found myself standing outside Sarah's office. I stepped into the dimly lit room, which had an air of mystery and something forbidden. She was there alone, working late, and I felt an urgent desire to understand the woman who had been slowly seeping into our lives. As I entered, tension filled the air, causing me to hesitate. Sarah looked up, surprise flickering across her face, quickly replaced by something else, an expression that was too warm, too knowing. A flicker of challenge danced in her eyes as she raised an eyebrow, as if daring me to ask the questions I feared. Compelled by a force I didn't fully comprehend, I found myself asking about the last meeting she had with Thomas. The instant I mentioned that night in the car, I recognized my boldness. Her response was unexpected. She didn't deny anything or downplay the situation. Instead, she stood and approached me slowly, a faint, almost mischievous smile playing on her lips. "What if I told you he's not the only one I've been meeting with?" she asked. My heart raced and I froze, the implication crashing over me. This moment was meant to be a confrontation, but instead, it transformed into something distinctly different. With a deliberate grace, she stepped forward, bridging the gap between us, and took my hand, drawing me deeper into the stillness of her office. My body felt constricted by uncertainty, yet there was an undeniable magnetism pulling me in. I was caught in a moment I couldn't understand or navigate. She leaned in, our breaths mingling in the charged air of that quiet space. My body felt tense, like I was suspended in uncertainty. She leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. The scent of lavender and something else wafted up, quickening my pulse. I felt a mix of curiosity and confusion. She wasn't just a threat, she was a doorway to something else. We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking, the silence heavy with anticipation. Then, without warning, she kissed me. Her lips were soft and hesitant, like she was testing the waters. I didn't pull away, I couldn't. The kiss deepened, her lips pressing harder against mine. My mind reeled as I struggled to make sense of the whirlwind unfolding around me. Everything felt like it was happening in slow motion, yet simultaneously racing forward at an alarming pace. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I was aware of the fact that this was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But I was already in it, feeling the weight of her hands on my back, the way she guided me to the couch. The office was silent, the air thick with tension. She was unveiling a part of me I hadn't even realized existed. She was revealing parts of myself that I had kept hidden, even from Thomas. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, she unmasked a side of me that I had never seen before. There was a vibe between us, but it wasn't just physical. It was like she was showing me a deeper part of myself, something I hadn't even realized was there. It was like she was unearthing a part of me that I had kept hidden. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we broke apart. Her fingers brushed against my cheek, and she whispered, "I think you know what this is about, don't you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The next day, I expected Thomas to come home and act like nothing had happened. But he came to me with a different look in his eyes. He was tense and something darker, like he was holding something back. I wanted to ask him about Sarah and the things I now knew, but the words caught in my throat. Later that week, I found myself at a hotel bar, sipping a drink I didn't really taste. Then, out of nowhere, Sarah walked in. She didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, there was something about her presence that felt like it had been planned. We didn't talk at first. She simply sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her body. The moment was charged, as if we were picking up where we'd left off. I didn't know where this was going, didn't know what I was supposed to do. But before I could stop myself, my hand reached out and touched hers, and just like that, we were back in it. There was an unspoken tension between us, pulling us in deeper. She leaned in, her lips brushing against my ear again. The world outside the hotel bar seemed to disappear, and for a moment, there was nothing but her and me. She was no longer just a woman in my husband's life, she was my mirror, the secret lurking beneath the surface, something I couldn't stop fixating on. By the time I left that night, I felt unmoored, unsure of who I had become. I was confused, and yet one thing was clear: I was no longer the person who had walked in. None of us were. The days following that night at the bar dragged on in a strange limbo, as I oscillated between what I knew was real and what I was beginning to crave. It felt as though the fabric of my life had shifted precariously. Everything I once deemed safe and familiar began to seem risky. The atmosphere around me grew sharper, more charged with tension. It was as if I was standing on a tightrope, balancing on conflicting desires, while the world around me spiraled further into complexity. Thomas, my husband, remained blissfully unaware, striding through life with an easy confidence that now felt naive. That night, when Sarah and I shared a fleeting look, a silent promise, we both understood that things could not remain unchanged for long. Despite my efforts to suppress it, she infiltrated my thoughts. I felt an unsettling mix of intrigue and fear. I was torn between pushing her out and the magnetic pull drawing me in. Soon, Sarah found new ways to weave herself into my life. We exchanged messages, nothing overt, but enough to quicken my heartbeat every time I saw her name flash on my phone. Thomas sent me his own messages, sometimes playful, other times mundane reminders that now felt heavy with the growing chasm between us. It was as if Sarah was the glue holding everything together, and our fragile facade was beginning to crack. Then one evening, it happened. Thomas returned home earlier than expected while I lingered in the kitchen, staring blankly at the counter in an effort to distract myself from the restlessness churning inside me. I couldn't decide whether I felt relief or trepidation when I saw him there. "Hey, you good?" he asked, his gaze soft, oblivious to the shift in the air between us, between everything we had built together. It was a simple question, but it crashed over me like a wave. I hadn't felt good in days, but I couldn't voice that truth. I nodded, forcing a smile as I tried to hold everything together. "Yeah, fine," I said, my voice a pitch too high and tremulous. He didn't seem to notice, at least not until he mentioned Sarah joining us for dinner the following week. "She invited us to a dinner party," he said casually. My response escaped me in a shaky outburst: "Yeah, whatever." I wasn't sure how I felt about that. The thought of Sarah in our home, laughing and chatting as if she belonged, stirred something unsettling inside of me. This wasn't simple jealousy, it was a darker, more complicated emotion that I wasn't ready to confront. Was Thomas genuinely clueless about the undertones of our situation? The thought gnawed at me as I tried to navigate the turbulent waters of my feelings. But then, Sarah appeared in that little black dress, radiating confidence and elegance as if she were born to be the center of attention. I knew Thomas didn't notice. He was too engrossed in his role as the loving husband, completely absorbed in his own world. For me, though, the air around us thickened, charged with an unspoken tension. When Sarah entered the room, it felt as if a weight was drawing me toward her. Dinner commenced, and the atmosphere was awkward from the start. Everyone was trying to maintain a facade of normalcy, but I caught the way Sarah's gaze lingered on me longer than it should have. Thomas was absorbed in a conversation with a colleague, creating the perfect opportunity for me to slip into a quieter corner with her. Although we didn't speak much, the tension was palpable, a silent language that required no words. I leaned in closer, feigning an adjustment to the table setting, but it was merely an excuse to be nearer to her. She mirrored my movement, the briefest brush of her fingers against my arm sending an electric shock through me. As dinner drew to a close and our conversation shifted to drinks, Sarah and I found ourselves outside on the balcony. The night was dark, the city buzzing quietly below us. When she turned to face me, the light from the balcony lamp illuminated her wild eyes. Without hesitation, she kissed me. Her lips were hungry, demanding, and I reciprocated, losing myself in the moment and forgetting about Thomas and everything else. We were engulfed in a dizzying spiral of desire. Just as we were lost in our dangerous game, the balcony door creaked open. Thomas stood there, his face inscrutable at first, as if he couldn't comprehend the scene before him. Then came the shift, the flash of realization in his eyes. He wasn't angry, he wasn't shocked either. Instead, a quiet understanding settled in, and my blood ran cold as I realized he knew. He was fully aware of what had transpired between Sarah and me. The air between us thickened, and we stood frozen, unable to speak. I felt as though I was drowning in the tension, crushed under its weight. Sarah didn't pull away, nor did I. We remained locked in an unspoken triangle, the silence between us stretching taut, broken only by the soft hum of the city below. I had no idea how this would end or what would come next, but one thing was certain: none of us would leave unchanged. We came in, and in that moment everything changed. The silence on the balcony felt suffocating, as if we were frozen in time, unable to move forward. Thomas stood there, his eyes locked on mine, while Sarah's gaze was fixed on him. His breaths were shallow, and I could sense the tension radiating from him, an unsettling mix of disbelief and something darker that I couldn't quite place. Neither of us spoke at first. Sarah and I were caught in this moment, yet there was an undeniable connection between us that drew us closer. Her hand brushed against mine, amplifying the intensity of the situation. She didn't pull away from Thomas either. The space between us shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. Thomas remained still, his gaze flickering between Sarah and me, his expression unreadable but the tightening of his jaw betraying his growing anxiety. The air was thick with unspoken words, palpable and charged. We were statues caught in a dangerous moment, and then, something in Thomas's gaze shifted. It transformed from confusion to curiosity, a quiet intrigue that added to the tension. Sarah stepped forward, moving slowly, as if she was testing the waters. The world outside felt suspended, leaving only this heightened moment where anything seemed possible. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, unable to conceal the way my body responded to Sarah's closeness. The desire that pulsed between us was overwhelming, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. We remained still, sharing this charged atmosphere. I noticed Thomas's eyes dart toward me again, and something within them had changed. It was no longer mere confusion, but a genuine curiosity. Sarah, undeterred, moved closer, her fingers grazing Thomas's arm tentatively, as if waiting for him to retreat. He didn't. Instead, he allowed her hand to rest there, his breath hitching as her touch lingered on his skin. Encouraged, she leaned in closer, her other hand sliding to his chest, deepening the complexity of what hung in the air between us.